I never imagined that a picturesque neighborhood like Pinewood Crest could harbor such tension beneath its manicured facade. When I first arrived, transferring to the region for my new role as a regional emergency planning officer, my spouse and I chose Pinewood Crest for its friendly reputation and beautiful surroundings. Tall pines rustling in the breeze, neatly paved roads, and rows of houses with tidy front lawns. It was exactly the kind of suburban dream we'd hoped for. On our move-in day, neighbors popped by with smiles and simple greetings. A few introduced themselves warmly, offering homemade cookies or advice about local shops. The sight of children playing safely in cul-de-sacs made me grin, reassured that we'd found a truly welcoming place. In my work, I'd learned the value of community cohesion, people helping one another in emergencies. Pinewood Crest seemed the perfect example of that. But as we settled in, hints of trouble emerged. Several residents whispered about the Homeowners Association, especially its vice president, a middle-aged woman named Clarice Westcott, though I heard she went by Karen. They warned me that Clarice was strict, aggressively so, about enforcing every line of the HOA rulebook. If she deemed something unacceptable, garden gnomes an inch too tall, sidewalk chalk drawings she considered unsightly, or kids playing ball too late in the evening, she'd be on the warpath. Most folks shrugged it off as typical HOA pettiness, something you could ignore or placate by following her myriad rules. At first, I didn't worry much. I had a robust career in emergency management spanning numerous cities. In my new role, I'd be liaising with municipalities to ensure proper evacuation routes, signage, and community preparedness plans. That's my passion, making sure that when disaster hits, floods, fires, hurricanes, communities can respond safely and effectively. Pinewood Crest, I thought, with its well-ordered layout, should be a breeze to equip with top-tier emergency measures. I had no inkling that Karen would attempt to sabotage those efforts, let alone do so in a way that endangered lives. And I certainly never guessed that her meddling would pit me against her in a battle that would shake Pinewood Crest's peaceful veneer to its core. Shortly after we'd unpacked our last box, I got down to business. My departmental position gave me authority and responsibility to coordinate emergency evacuation planning across several nearby neighborhoods, including Pinewood Crest. This meant assessing local hazards, the potential for wildfires from the surrounding pine forest, the risk of flash flooding in the valley, and the challenge of guiding residents out swiftly in a crisis. Working alongside city engineers and local volunteer committees, I proposed new evacuation signs at strategic intersections, clear, reflective markers directing drivers to designated safe routes. I also suggested installing smaller signposts along footpaths for those who might not be driving. A surprising number of households included seniors or folks with mobility challenges, so the signage needed to be thorough and well-placed. When I presented the plan at a local council session, Pinewood Crest's HOA leadership was in attendance. The board president, Mr. Daniels, thanked me for my diligence. Some other board members gave nods of approval. Then I glimpsed Clarice Karen Westcott, the HOA vice president, perched stiffly in her seat. She wore a tailored blazer, her posture radiating authority. She asked pointed questions about sign aesthetics, neighborhood uniformity, and whether these markers would clutter the environment. I assured her the signs would be as unobtrusive as possible while remaining functional. The city council gave the green light. Overall, the hearing ended positively. However, as I left the council chambers, I noticed Karen shooting me a tight-lipped smile. Something in her expression felt chilly, almost distrustful. Perhaps she disliked any outside influence meddling with her neighborhood's carefully curated appearance. But I shrugged it off. My job was to protect lives, not appease petty aesthetic complaints. If Karen had concerns, she'd hopefully raise them politely. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of site visits, sign prototypes, and coordination with contractors. Thanks to the city's budget, we had funds to install metal signposts with high-visibility reflectors. We planned to place them along the main roads of Pinewood Crest, plus smaller side streets, ensuring no home was more than a few blocks from a clear evacuation directive. Meanwhile, I started receiving small hints that Karen wasn't pleased. A few times, I'd spot her patrolling the streets in her car or briskly walking with that infamous HOA rulebook clutched to her chest. One day, she caught me as I supervised a sign installation near the community playground. "Hello there," she said, her tone artificially bright. We appreciate your efforts, but I noticed these signs are taller than the standard height for roadside markers in Pinewood Crest. Our bylaws specify certain dimensions and colors for any posted sign. Did you consult the HOA? I kept my tone professional. This height is standard for emergency signage. It must be visible above parked cars and not obscured by shrubs. The city's ordinance actually takes precedence over HOA guidelines in matters of safety. She smiled thinly. Well, we'll see about that. We have aesthetic standards to maintain, after all. We wouldn't want the neighborhood looking like a highway rest stop. She left with a little wave, as though she'd already triumphed. I brushed it off. I'd encountered picky HOA representatives before, complaining about the color or shape of signs mandated by public safety regulations. Usually, the local government's codes overruled their aesthetic concerns. I assumed we'd be fine, as Mr. Daniels and others on the board seemed supportive. Yet, each subsequent day, Karen found new reasons to pester me. That sign is too close to Ms. Hodgkin's rose garden. Or, we must ensure no reflective glare disturbs nighttime drivers. It was borderline harassment, but I tried to remain patient. The last thing I wanted was an all-out feud with the HOA vice president. Despite Karen's complaints, we pressed on, and soon the new emergency evacuation signs were up around Pinewood Crest, shining in the sun by day and reflecting headlights by night. Residents began noticing them, some even thanking me for improving their sense of security. A few folks had grown up in areas plagued by wildfires and recognized the importance of clear routes. It felt gratifying to see my plan come to life. But then, just a couple of weeks after installation, I started receiving frantic messages from the city's field team. Early one morning, several of the brand new signs were discovered vandalized. Some had been spray painted over, rendering them illegible. Others had their reflective panels scratched off or removed entirely. At least 3 signposts were knocked down altogether, left lying in the grass with their bolts forcibly removed. It was deliberate, systematic damage. My stomach twisted. Vandalizing life-saving signage wasn't just a petty act. It endangered real people in a future emergency. Furious, I drove to Pinewood Crest to assess the damage. The sight was worse in person. Twisted metal, bright spray paint scrawled across the arrows, and footprints in the dirt suggesting someone had taken a crowbar to the signposts. Residents clustered around, shaken. One older gentleman exclaimed, "This is outrageous. These signs might save our lives if we have to evacuate." A mother with 2 small children pointed at the ruined signs, looking anxious. Why would anyone do this? I had no ready answer. Who indeed would stoop to such sabotage? Karen's face flickered in my mind. She despised the signs, but would she go so far as to physically destroy them? It felt almost too extreme. Then again, her hostility was no secret. That same afternoon, I filed a police report. The city's engineering department estimated thousands of dollars in damages. We needed to reinstall or repair the signs soon. For the moment, though, large swaths of Pinewood Crest were left without functioning evacuation markers. Exactly the scenario I dreaded. As news of the vandalism spread, rumors swirled. Some in the neighborhood openly speculated that Karen might be responsible, or at least behind it. Others insisted she wouldn't risk legal trouble by committing such a crime. But the circumstantial evidence was damning. She was the only vocal opponent, and the vandalism targeted precisely the signage she'd complained about most. Maybe she paid some hooligans, suggested one resident. Another recalled seeing Karen's car prowling late at night, though no one had proof of wrongdoing. I weighed my next steps carefully. Confronting Karen outright with no solid evidence might lead nowhere, or even backfire, if she played victim. So I compiled every complaint and email she'd sent about the signs, along with witness accounts of her negative remarks. If the police found forensic clues linking her to the vandalism, we'd have a motive. In the meantime, I decided to keep a close eye on her. Still, the city was pressing me to fix the signs quickly. "We can't let them stay vandalized," my supervisor said. "But we also need assurance they won't be destroyed again." Repair crews stood by, ready to re-erect the signposts. The question was, would the vandal, or vandals, strike again? Before we could even finish planning repairs, the situation escalated. 2 nights after the initial vandalism, more signs were targeted, including ones along the neighborhood's main boulevard, a well-lit area, presumably harder for a criminal to operate unnoticed. Residents reported hearing metal-on-metal clanging around midnight, but by the time anyone investigated, the culprit was gone. In the morning, we found more painted slurs like ugly junk sprayed in neon across the signs. Several arrows were snapped off. The damage was even more extensive than before. The police stepped up patrols in Pinewood Crest, suspecting an orchestrated campaign. They gathered surveillance footage from residents with security cameras. One family's doorbell cam captured a blurred figure wearing a hoodie, face hidden, smashing a sign with a heavy tool. The footage was too grainy to identify the person's features, but the silhouette seemed smaller than a large male. Possibly a woman? Fears soared. Local news picked up the story. Emergency sign vandal strikes again, raising questions about who could be so reckless. Some residents canceled weekend trips, worried about being away if an emergency struck. Tensions rose at the HOA, many demanding action. The board president, Mr. Daniels, publicly condemned the vandal, promising full cooperation with law enforcement. Karen's response? A carefully worded statement about how she deplored illegal acts, but also felt the sign design was out of place in Pinewood Crest. She never offered any direct condemnation, just a vague claim that residents' valid concerns over sign aesthetics mustn't be ignored. Her words felt suspiciously like justification. I grew more convinced she was somehow involved. Desperate to catch the perpetrator, the police considered setting up a sting operation. With my background in emergency management and some training in crisis response, I offered to assist. The plan was simple. We'd reinstall one of the most vandalized signs in a high-profile spot, then keep watch overnight. If the culprit returned, we'd have an officer and a hidden camera waiting. I enlisted a local contractor to fix the sign near the playground. Once it was upright, shiny, and thoroughly repaired, word spread that the city was replacing all damaged signs within days. The message was clear: vandalizing them repeatedly would be pointless. On a moonlit evening, I parked my unmarked car down a side street with a vantage point of that sign. A plainclothes officer, Officer Barlow, hid nearby, blending in as a jogger. A small, concealed trail cam was also positioned behind a bush. Our hearts pounded with anticipation. Would the vandal dare strike again? Hour after hour passed in silence. Lights flicked off in the houses around 11 p.m. A cat slunk across the sidewalk, but no sign of a midnight intruder. Then around 1:30 a.m., I saw headlights creeping along the street. The vehicle paused near the sign, an SUV, older model, possibly silver or white in color. My adrenaline surged. A figure emerged from the driver's side, carrying what looked like a long metal tool. With swift movements, they approached the sign. I squinted, trying to see. The person wore dark clothing, a hood pulled up, but the street lamp illuminated a glimpse of their face. Officer Barlow edged closer from behind a fence, radio at the ready. The figure raised the tool, likely a crowbar, and readied to strike the sign's post. Suddenly, the floodlights we'd set up triggered, washing the scene in brightness. The intruder froze. Officer Barlow darted out, gun holstered but visible, shouting, "Police! Drop the weapon!" I sprinted over to help, heart hammering. Caught in the glare, the figure dropped the crowbar with a clang. Then, as if in shock, they turned, and I saw the face. Indeed, it was Karen. Her eyes blazed with a mixture of rage and fear. Officer Barlow moved swiftly, handcuffing her as she sputtered protests. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "This is harassment. I was just inspecting the sign." We all knew that was a ridiculous claim. The crowbar and fresh paint lying at her feet told the real story. I stared in disbelief. She'd truly been the vandal all along. This unassuming HOA vice president had taken her loathing of the evacuation signs to destructive, criminal extremes. As Officer Barlow read Karen her Miranda rights, she continued her tirade. "I told you these signs degrade our property values, ruin the neighborhood's charm." She thrashed in the officer's grip. "You have no right to barge in and clutter our streets with your ugly markers." I stepped forward, reining in my anger. "Karen, these signs aren't just decorations. They guide people to safety in an emergency. You're risking lives with this vandalism." Her face twisted. "That's nonsense. We've never had a major disaster here. If something happens, folks can find their own way. I won't watch my beautiful community turn into a sea of warning signs." I shook my head in disbelief. "One day, you might need those routes yourself." My job is to protect you, too, whether you realize it or not. But she was too far gone, bitterness fueling her. She spat accusations about me being an outsider with no respect for HOA standards. When the police loaded her into a patrol car, she kept ranting, claiming she'd sue the city and that everyone would regret crossing her. Neighbors, awakened by the commotion, gathered on porches and lawns. Murmurs of shock passed among them. Some truly hadn't believed Karen capable of such brazen acts. Others shook their heads grimly, as though not surprised at all. The hush was broken only by the wail of the distant siren as the police car drove off with Karen inside. The morning after Karen's arrest, Pinewood Crest buzzed with stunned conversations. Residents debated whether she acted alone or if any allies had helped her. No evidence emerged of accomplices, though some folks suspected she might have had moral support from a few HOA members who also disliked the signs, just not to the point of vandalism. Local media exploded with coverage. HOA Vice President arrested for destroying emergency evacuation signs. Journalists interviewed me briefly, but I mostly deferred to the police. My job was to ensure the signs got restored fast. Still, the story gained traction, highlighting how one misguided individual's aesthetic obsession could endanger public safety. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from Karen's actions. Mr. Daniels issued a formal apology on the HOA's website, condemning vandalism and affirming full support for the city's emergency measures. Karen Westcott acted on her own, he wrote, and we share our community's outrage. The board scheduled an emergency meeting to address leadership changes, as Karen's position was now untenable. Residents were left reeling. Many felt betrayed by someone who had campaigned for high standards but stooped to crime. Parents with children were especially horrified. She risked our safety for a petty reason, one mother told me. My kids and I rely on knowing how to evacuate if there's a fire or something. Though the culprit was caught, I felt no satisfaction. Only relief that the vandalism would stop before it caused more damage or delayed the signage further. My real concern lay in rebuilding trust and ensuring the neighborhood remained committed to emergency preparedness. Days later, Karen stood before a county judge, charged with multiple counts of vandalism, trespassing, and destruction of public property. The severity was compounded by the fact that these signs were critical for safety. The prosecutor argued that her actions jeopardized the well-being of thousands of residents in an emergency scenario. Even though no actual disaster had occurred yet, the potential harm was immense. Karen's attorney tried to paint her as an upstanding community leader who'd let her passion for neighborhood aesthetics get out of hand, claiming she was misguided, not malicious. They insisted she shouldn't face jail time, but the judge seemed unimpressed. Preliminary hearings suggested Karen could face significant fines, probation, and possibly a short jail sentence if found guilty on all counts. Local TV cameras captured her entering the courthouse in a tailored suit, looking subdued. For the first time, I saw no trace of the defiance that once radiated from her. The evidence was damning. Police had the crowbar, her fingerprints, plus the doorbell camera footage from earlier attacks. Odds of acquittal were slim. Outside the courthouse, I avoided direct confrontation. I had to maintain professional distance, though part of me wanted to tell her, "Look what your reckless obsession cost you." Instead, I funneled my energy into finalizing the sign restorations and ensuring Pinewood Crest's evacuation plan was fully operational. We'd come too far to let Karen's rampage derail us further. With Karen behind bars awaiting trial, the city allocated extra funds to expedite repairs. Crews worked diligently to replace or fix every ruined sign. This time, we added tamper-resistant fasteners and a vandal-proof reflective coating. The battered posts were swapped for sturdier steel, anchored more deeply in the ground. The project cost ballooned, thanks to Karen's spree of destruction, but the city's leaders saw it as a necessary investment. On the day the final sign was reinstalled, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Pinewood Crest once again had a complete, functional set of evacuation markers. I spent hours driving the routes, verifying each sign's placement and clarity. At dusk, I circled back, ensuring the reflective surfaces shone under headlights. Everything looked perfect. Residents breathed easier. A father of 3 stopped me while I inspected a sign near his house. "Thank you," he said simply, voice thick with gratitude. We all slept uneasy after hearing about the vandalism. But now we know if something happens, we'll have guidance. Hearing that validated my work. After so much chaos, Pinewood Crest could move forward, trusting that an emergency wouldn't devolve into confusion. That sense of safety was exactly why I joined this profession. A week later, Mr. Daniels contacted me personally, inviting me to speak at an upcoming HOA meeting. "We want you to explain how these evacuation routes benefit the community," he said. "We had a shadow cast on this project by Ms. Westcott's actions. Now we'd like to restore confidence." I hesitated at first, remembering how Karen had tried to sabotage everything. But Mr. Daniels insisted the board wholeheartedly supported emergency preparedness. "We need to heal the rift," he admitted. "Many residents feel shaken. We'd like you to show them the bigger picture." Agreeing, I prepared a concise presentation detailing the area's potential hazards, wildfire risk from the pine forest, historical flooding patterns, and how the new signage streamlined evacuation. I included data on how evacuation times drop significantly when neighborhoods have well-marked routes. The HOA meeting, set in Pinewood Crest Community Hall, promised a big turnout. On the night of the meeting, the hall filled with residents. The mood was calmer than I expected, less hostility, more curiosity. People wanted reassurance. Mr. Daniels introduced me politely, praising my team's dedication in repairing the vandalism so swiftly. I spoke about community resilience, emphasizing that these signs weren't meant to undermine the neighborhood's charm, but to safeguard lives in worst-case scenarios. I shared real anecdotes from other regions where timely evacuations had saved countless people. The audience listened intently, some nodding, others looking solemn. By the end, applause echoed through the hall. A handful of residents asked thoughtful questions. How do we handle neighbors with mobility issues? Where can we find official hazard maps? Could we coordinate a neighborhood drill? Their eagerness encouraged me. Despite Karen's efforts, Pinewood Crest was genuinely open to improving preparedness. Hope swelled in me. In the weeks following my HOA presentation, the atmosphere in Pinewood Crest shifted toward unity. The board, minus Karen, introduced a renewed focus on safety. They arranged workshops on basic first aid, fire prevention, and how to pack a go-bag. Even some who once grumbled about ugly signs admitted they felt more secure seeing the neighborhood adopt a robust safety culture. An unexpected source of healing came from a group of teens who organized a volunteer day, scrubbing away leftover spray paint from sidewalks and fences near the vandalized signs. They painted small murals around the signposts, tasteful designs that complemented the emergency arrows. The city allowed it, so long as the official signage remained clear. The results were surprisingly artistic. Neighbors rallied around these improvements. Some started friendly competitions for most prepared household, trading tips on emergency kits. A few older residents, once aloof, realized the signs might help them or visiting relatives. I watched from the sidelines, impressed by the self-driven transformation. The only sour note was Karen's absence. Gone were her daily patrols. She'd been released on bail but kept a low profile, presumably awaiting her final court date. A rumor circulated that she'd put her house on the market. People debated whether she'd stay in Pinewood Crest after her public disgrace. The general sentiment was that no one missed her heavy-handed interference. Finally, Karen's trial date arrived. The local courthouse buzzed with spectators and reporters. The case was straightforward, but the public's curiosity was high. The prosecution laid out evidence. Karen's repeated attempts to deface the signs, the videos, the crowbar, the eyewitness accounts, even her brazen remarks about disliking the signage. They stressed how her vandalism endangered public safety. Karen's defense tried a different angle. They argued that she'd had a temporary lapse in judgment due to stress, that she was influenced by medication, and that her actions were exaggerated by the media. They painted her as a woman who treasured her neighborhood's aesthetics, claiming she didn't realize the extent of the damage she was causing. But the judge, unimpressed, repeatedly reminded the court that ignorance or personal preference was no justification for damaging city-owned emergency equipment. I testified briefly, explaining how essential the signs were. The defense tried to corner me by suggesting the signage was excessive, but I calmly reiterated the city's ordinances and the evidence-based approach for evacuation routes. The cross-examination ended quickly. Despite her lawyer's attempts, the verdict felt inevitable. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge cited her disregard for the safety of thousands of residents as a major factor. While sentencing guidelines gave some leeway, Karen was ordered to pay heavy restitution for the cost of repairs. She also faced probation, community service, and a possible short jail term. The judge scolded her for her arrogance and lack of remorse, hoping she'd realize the gravity of undermining public safety. A hush fell in the courtroom as the sentence was read. Karen trembled, tears escaping her otherwise stern facade. Whatever illusions she'd harbored of escaping serious consequences were shattered. She was let out quietly, ignoring the cameras that flashed. In that moment, I felt no triumph, only relief that justice was served and the sabotage would end for good. After Karen's trial, Pinewood Crest collectively exhaled. The HOA board officially removed her from any leadership role, finalizing what had been a foregone conclusion. The home Karen once owned went on the market, and rumors suggested she planned to relocate after finishing her sentence and paying fines. Mr. Daniels approached me, expressing gratitude. Without your persistence, we might never have gotten those signs fully installed or caught the vandal. Despite all the drama, I'm thankful we ended up safer. I appreciated his thanks, but reminded him it was the entire community that stood up against Karen's sabotage. Neighbors who reported suspicious behavior, those who welcomed sign repairs, the volunteers who cleaned up graffiti, everyone played a part. My spouse and I continued living in Pinewood Crest, forging friendships that extended beyond the chaos. We joined neighborhood potlucks, watched local kids play at the newly safe playground, and took pride in how quickly the community had bounced back. Our home felt more like home now that the tension lifted. Even city officials lauded Pinewood Crest as an example of resilience. In staff meetings, my boss praised how we overcame sabotage to implement a model evacuation system. If adversity can happen there, he joked, it can happen anywhere. But we persevered, thanks to this team. Months later, just as the dust of the trial had settled, I received a letter in the mail. The return address indicated it was from the county detention center. Opening it cautiously, I discovered it was from Karen. The note was brief, handwritten, and shaky. I realize I can't undo the harm I caused. I'm sorry for my actions and how they endangered the community. My zeal for a certain look drove me to madness. I regret it all. I hope Pinewood Crest can move on. Clarice Westcott. It was unexpected. I stared at the letter for a while, recalling how she'd ranted about the signs being eyesores, and how she'd insisted she'd done nothing wrong. Now, a kernel of remorse emerged. Perhaps facing real consequences changed her perspective. I felt a mix of pity and relief. Perhaps Karen had finally grasped the seriousness of her crimes. I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't sure if it was genuine contrition or an attempt to lessen her guilt. But in a quiet moment, I decided to write back a short message. I accept your apology. I hope you find a better path forward. Pinewood Crest is moving on and remains safer than ever. I mailed it with no expectations. Regardless of Karen's personal journey, the community had indeed moved on, forging a future where the emergency signs were just part of everyday life. That synergy between local government, HOA, and residents was the best outcome we could have hoped for. With Karen gone, the HOA wholeheartedly embraced collaboration with my office. They even requested advanced training for neighborhood volunteers, forming a small community emergency response team, CERT. We organized drills simulating wildfire evacuations, highlighting how to drive calmly along the marked routes. The kids got involved too, turning an educational event into a game, a mock escape room challenge that taught them about readiness kits and meeting points. This blossoming culture of preparedness spread beyond Pinewood Crest. Nearby neighborhoods took note, implementing similar sign installations and holding joint practice sessions. City officials recognized my leadership in orchestrating these expansions, awarding me a small citation of merit. I accepted it on behalf of all the unsung volunteers who poured hours into making sure no one got left behind in a crisis. Walking Pinewood Crest streets one evening, I admired how the reflective arrows glowed under lamplight. A few neighbors came out to say hello, calling me by name, asking if I'd join them for a friendly barbecue. The warmth in their voices reminded me how far we'd come from the fractious days when Karen lurked around every corner, complaining or plotting. One fateful summer, Pinewood Crest had a small-scale test of its new system. A wildfire ignited in the dry brush of the nearby forest. While it never reached the neighborhood's doorstep, city officials ordered a precautionary partial evacuation for some southwestern blocks. Thanks to the clear signage, residents calmly followed the indicated routes, and volunteer block captains helped older neighbors pack vehicles. The process was smooth, incident-free, and by nightfall, the fire was contained. Everyone returned safely the next morning. Local news hailed the neighborhood's preparedness, praising how no panic ensued. A few folks told me personally, "Thank goodness for those signs. We never realized how easy it is to panic when you see smoke." The markers made it obvious where to go. The success story garnered further appreciation for all the efforts we'd invested. And ironically, it underscored exactly why Karen's vandalism could have spelled disaster if left unchecked. As time passed, the memory of Karen's sabotage faded into local lore, an example neighbors used to caution new residents about the importance of following community guidelines in good faith. The sign vandalism turned into a cautionary tale. One person's misguided obsession could threaten the greater good, but also how a community, united, could thwart such threats. Sometimes I still marveled at how bizarre the situation had been. A seemingly harmless HOA official so fixated on aesthetics that she nearly compromised public safety. Yet, in the grand scheme, her downfall led Pinewood Crest to become an even stronger, more cohesive place. Oddly enough, that was a kind of silver lining. Adversity forging resilience. Every now and then, I'd see new families biking around the neighborhood, pointing at the neat red and white evacuation arrows, instructing their children on how to follow them if needed. That simple snapshot warmed my heart. We protected future generations from confusion and panic in a potential crisis. That was exactly why I did this work. Eventually, life in Pinewood Crest settled into a comfortable rhythm. My spouse and I thrived among friendly neighbors, forging friendships that extended beyond block parties or official meetings. We knew that if a real emergency ever struck, we could rely on each other, guided by the very signs that once ignited so much controversy. Karen, meanwhile, served her sentence, short though it was, and reportedly moved to a different state afterward. Word had it she carried deep resentment for how her reputation had been shattered. I hoped she learned a lesson about how personal vanity should never trump collective safety. Whether she fully changed was unknown, but the important part was that she no longer posed a threat to Pinewood Crest. On my final inspection before a citywide readiness audit, I drove slowly through the neighborhood, checking each sign's condition, ensuring no new vandalism or damage. They stood tall, shining, and ready. Families waved from their driveways. Kids laughed on scooters. Retirees tended flower beds. The sense of safety was palpable. I parked near the largest sign at Pinewood Crest's main intersection, stepping out to glance at the arrow pointing toward the designated evacuation route. My reflection stared back in the sign's sheen. I felt gratitude for how the community had come together, resisting sabotage, championing cooperation, and forging an identity built on mutual care. Yes, I thought, this is how a neighborhood can truly flourish, when it stands up to threats, internal or external, all for the shared goal of protecting one another. In a world often fraught with unexpected perils, Pinewood Crest had become a shining example of unity in the face of adversity. And for me personally, the entire journey, from the day I met that stern-faced Karen to witnessing her downfall and the neighborhood's rebirth, reaffirmed my belief that doing the right thing, no matter how challenging, ultimately yields a happier, safer ending for everyone.